thank you everyone for being here. Also in our chat, we've just added a couple more things, some really relevant links to our panelists for today. Of course, Jeanne DeVita, who is a writers.com instructor and wonderful author herself. That's at the top. We also have the Naughty Books documentary, which we'll learn a little bit more about. We have a link to the store, The Ripped Bodice, and of course, our writers.com Instagram. I just urge you all to follow it if you aren't already, because you'll be able to learn more about events like this and all sorts of other programming that we have going on. So follow it if you're not already. And of course, this is a romance panel. We'd love to see you in our upcoming classes that are romance centric, but if not, we have a lot of other courses. So please check that out. Without further ado, let me introduce you to our panelists. First up, we have Jeanne DeVita. Jeanne DeVita is a professional developmental editor, writing instructor, and widely published romance author. She holds an MFA in creative writing from the University of Notre Dame and a BA from Iowa State University. Her course, Crafting the Romance Novel with Writers.com, begins February 1st, and she will also run a 2-day webinar on how to write good sex, as Fred just said. So we would love to see you all there. Austen Rachlis, I think I just butchered her name, even though I practiced it, is the director of the documentary Naughty Books, a movie seemingly about self-published romance novels, but is at its core about women challenging the status quo, stepping forward to tell the world they aren't ashamed of their sexuality. An author herself, Austen wrote the novel Hacker Mom as a launch title for Amazon's Kindle Serial initiative and has ghostwritten 4 books and middle grade series for Simon & Schuster. You can and should watch Naughty Books on Amazon Prime and Hulu. And our third panelist for this evening is Taylor Capizola, who is a strategic storyteller and the manager of The Ripped Bodice, an independent brick and mortar bookstore devoted to the celebration of romance novels. The store is proudly woman and queer owned, so please shop for your next romance novel at The Ripped Bodice la.com. So again, please see all our links right there. I know there's more people coming in, so I just added it to the chat as well as people are trickling into the Zoom, just to make sure everyone has those links. And so to begin with, we're going to start for the first half of this evening with our kind of moderated panel, and then we'll have a Q&A, because I know we have a very informed group of participants here tonight, so we want to make sure you're able to ask your questions. But first off, what I want to know from the three of you is, how did each of you come to the world of romance novels? Was it reading romance specifically? Was it through other genres? Was it through writing? Just what was your first exposure to this world? And don't forget to unmute.
Well, I'll go first. Oh yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, Jeanne,
I'll
go,
please.
Yeah. Well, I think I probably got introduced to it through fan fiction, which is, I think in a previous iteration, I might have been embarrassed to admit that fact, but I take ownership of that now. I got really into reading X-Files fan fiction as a teenager, and just then wanted more stories like that, wanted maybe stories that were more proofread, and developed, so sort of discovered the romance shelf at the library, and went from there. And then I sort of fell away from it for a while, and then I think, like a lot of people, like with the phenomenon of 50 Shades of Grey, like sort of roped me back in out of curiosity of like, what is this book that's blowing up the world right now? And I sort of remembered, how much I had liked it, and sort of went from there.
Yeah, and I see Taylor, you're about to speak, so go for it.
Yes. Okay, perfect. So I actually started reading romance when I was really young. When I was growing up in high school, I was like the notorious not reader. I would never read a book for class. I would try to get away with not reading it. And I always was like, oh, well, I just don't like reading. I just don't think it's for me. And then I picked up The Hunger Games, which isn't a romance explicitly, but when I was reading it, I was like, if Peeta and Katniss don't end up together, I'm gonna lose my mind. And I gave the book to my mom, who's been an avid fantasy reader my whole life, her whole life. And I was like, Mom, I need them to end up together. And she was like, do you know that there's a whole genre of book that is like this, just this, right? And I was like, what? And she was like, yeah. And she took me to Barnes and Noble and we like went shopping and she got me like 10 books and I read them all in a week. And ever since then started my undeniable, unfixable love for all things romance, especially fantasy romance. I have a soft spot for YA romance, YA fantasy. So ever since then, and then I went to college in DC, and I kind of fell into the kind of, I guess, trope, for lack of a better word, of like reading really dense nonfiction books, or like, if a politician would write a book, like all my friends would be reading it. And I was like, I guess I got to read this too. And I hated it. And I was like, wow, I can't believe I loved to read. And then I suddenly hated to read again. And then when I graduated, I joined a queer romance book club based out of Politics and Prose in Washington, D.C. And I was like, oh, no, I just love romance. And I love queer romance and fantasy romance. And so I reignited that love that I knew that I had. And from there, 5 years on, I am now, working at a romance bookstore surrounded by it all day long. And so I owe it all to Suzanne Collins back in 2010.
Taylor, that is amazing virtual high five, because The Hunger Games, like chapter one, is one of the most technically perfect books ever written. Chapter one of the first book, it gives away everything. Like there are hints, breadcrumbs, it's brilliant. So high five.
That's
I love
so
that
good.
book so much.
So good.
I came into romance really, really like inappropriately young. My mom was a professional romance writer her whole career, but she was one of those folks that never went to college. She went to high school like in Chicago as like a work study kid. I was the first person in my family to go to college, and my mom literally, when my younger brother was born, I was 7 at that time, and she started dabbling in writing and really was in love with romance writing. So I grew up like surrounded by every single copy of Nora Roberts books, multiple copies. My mom would like make notes, earmark the pages, and I really saw her sort of DIY a career at a time when it was really, really a very different market than it is now. So she started writing when I was about 7, and literally like back in the days of like typewriters, and she would mail, but she would FedEx in a box, like the manuscript to agents, and wait for that postcard to come back to say, we've received your manuscript and we are unfortunately not interested. But she spent probably, I don't know, 5 years at least teaching herself how to write, workshopping and reading, studying craft books. And then she entered a contest that was actually held by Romance Writers of America. She won first place and literally got a publishing contract with Silhouette Books from there. And so literally like my childhood was like my mom driving us to school, like always late, hair on fire, wearing slippers, like embarrassing as all get out. And then, I have pictures of her like with Nora Roberts with the big 80s hair and like sequin dresses. So she had a whole career after really sort of learning to do it for herself. And she unfortunately passed away about 7, 8 years ago, when she was way too young to leave us. But she left behind this amazing legacy. And when I, of course, so I think I read my first romance was like the most unbelievably like, how did mom let me do it? But I did. I started reading them myself when I was probably 9. Like I remember being so young and seeing these like things happen on the page that I was very intrigued by. And I of course went to like college, grad school, and thought, I'm not sure that I'm a genre fiction person. Like I really didn't know where I was going to end up in publishing or teaching, writing, I wanted to just do it all. And of course, like as soon as I finished grad school and I was like working a 9-to-5 job, teaching on the side, editing and writing on the side, my mom was with a publisher and she's like, why don't you just send, my editor an email? And they hired me like that. And they were like, we want you to run our romance imprint. And I was like, oh my gosh, I really better catch up on. I've been reading like the wrong stuff for years. So then, and that's been now like about 15 years. So I've spent the last, quite a bit too long of my life editing, teaching, writing, doing it. And it's been like every time, like I just was at the Rip Bodice yesterday and like I just left there like singing a song as I drive home, because it's the greatest thing to be able to work in this field and do what you really love. And no matter how you come to it, early, late, whatever, it's been a great place for me. I'm really happy to be here tonight too. I see so many familiar faces in the Zoom, so thank you for having me.
Oh yeah, well, we're lucky to have you. And actually, I'm going to do something that I'm going to kind of go off script here a little bit, but I had a whole story arc planned for my questions, but just seeing the smile on all your faces, I'm going to jump ahead, a little bit in my questions and just ask, what do you love about romance? Because I see that like on the smiles on your faces, and just so ask, what do you love about romance, and what misconceptions do you think people have about romance? Because that was something that you all kind of touched on a little bit, this idea of this maybe guilty pleasure. And I don't believe personally in guilty pleasures. I just believe in pleasure. So I just wanted you to each kind of talk about why you love it and what misconceptions that you think some people might have.
I would love to start on this one, because we do get people in all the time, especially partners of people who come into the store, and maybe they're sometimes confused, or they like to ask questions like, oh, so like this bookstore is entirely romance? How is that even possible? And then they're shocked when I tell them that it's the single most prolific, successful, and profitable genre in all of literature. For decades it's been that way. And they're like, really? And I'm like, yeah, actually, like completely. Also, romance is in every type of media that you consume on a daily basis, all day long, every day. I promise you has romance in it in some capacity. It is everywhere all the time. And I think, it's funny because obviously we're called the Rip Bodice. There's been this, the stereotype of the bodice ripper type of romance book that dominated the 80s and 90s, very pulpy, very sexy with the covers and everything like that. But it has become this diffused, incredible genre where you can come in and you can give me like the most insane amount of like stipulations and requirements that you want from a book, and I will be able to find you a romance book that fits it. Like, I promise. It has almost become like a game in the store for all the booksellers to be able to like try to find these books with all of these like special requirements and things like that, because it is that all encompassing of a genre. If you want something that's going to break your heart, we'll find it for you. If you want something that's not going to be, saccharine, we'll find it for you. If you want something that's saccharine, we'll find it for you. If you want something that has monsters in it, or you want something that deals with tough topics like domestic violence, we have things like that. We have historicals that come from the Gilded Age in New York to the Regency era to World War I and everything in between. It is just the most incredibly diverse genre of media in any capacity that I think has ever existed. And so I think that's why I love it so much. And I love when people come in and they don't know what they're looking for. They come in and they don't necessarily want to look for anything, and then they end up leaving with a book because we've convinced them that there is something for them. There is always going to be something for you in the romance genre, whether that's a subgenre that, like I said, is like monster romances or dark romances, mafia, or contemporaries. It exists. It's all there, and it is waiting to be read at any given moment.
I think for me, like what I love about it is just the way that it really like kind of taps into emotions in a very pure way. Like I would say I'm a fairly even keeled person. Someone might even say repressed, but like I remember I was reading a Colleen Hoover book and I'd never read her before, so I didn't know what I was getting into. And I was waiting for my car to get an oil change, and I was like sobbing in this like Jiffy Lube, right? Like, and there's just not a lot of things that will get me to do that. And like romance almost always will, even if it's happy tears, right? Like it's just such a pure like two people having to work through their own issues to come together. And yes, and that might be involving a monster or, you know, the Amish or like whatever. Like, you know, there's so many different ways to explore that. But at its core, that's what it is. And I think as a misconception, I think there's this idea that it's not realistic, it's a fantasy. Well, first of all, it's fiction, so I don't actually think that's a problem. But I also read a lot of mysteries. It's another genre that I read a lot in. Well, I'm probably never going to solve a murder in my life. Like, that's just not something that's going to happen. But most people in their life will fall in love, will engage in a relationship, will have issues within that relationship. And yes, maybe it won't be with a billionaire or a football player, a rock star, but the core issues of those relationships remain the same no matter what job a person does or even what subculture the person is. So I think this idea that it's silly and unrealistic, I really take issue with that. I think, yeah.
I think I have two misconceptions that really do build onto Taylor and Austen's responses, and those lead to the misconceptions lead to what I love most about romance. The first is that romance novels just aren't quality writing, or it's not a good product that represents, like, you know, Taylor, you said the word literature, and you know, I'll never forget in grad school, one of the most harsh critiques I received was like my writing felt like very science fiction, and like there was like that audible like someone said, you know, but in reality, I could list off 10 writers like that without even thinking, who I think publishing in romance right now are absolutely brilliant. They can stand up beside absolutely anyone in any work. And the question of whether or not their writing is quality is really, I mean, it's laughable. It's when I see people say, you know, oh, I've never read a romance novel, but I think that's what I want to write because it seems so easy. There is as much craft that goes into creating a romance novel as absolutely anything else that's out there. So I'll settle down, but that's my number one misconception, is that this is not quality writing. This is not quality work. Some of the best writers that we are blessed to read are writing in romance right now, I think. And sort of second to that, but also, you know, parallel, is that there's just no appetite and no depth of diversity in romance. Like when I really started as an acquiring editor, you know, I was also writing. And as a queer author, I was looking for stock art and things that would represent same-sex couples. And, you know, 15, 12 years ago, you would look for stock art for a lesbian couple, and it was like, what? Who is driving this ship? Like, it was crazy, strange stuff. And I think that the market is responding slowly, but it is responding to what readers really want. Like, readers want to see their real lives reflected, and that includes diverse couplings, difficult topics, things that, you know, definitely maybe have been less represented. But that's sort of the beauty, I think, of being able to access a panel like this, a store like the Rit Bodice, or a documentary like Austen's, is really, it's almost like the readers are creating what they want to see in the market. And that's, I think, the most powerful way to participate in an industry. You know, people who are passionate, they want to see what they want out there. And if they're not seeing it, they're empowered to write their own books. So that's what I love to talk about, because I feel like those misconceptions are just everywhere, unless you're actually really, you know, nose deep in this industry. And then you're like, oh no, let's talk about this. It's
Can
way
I
different than
add
you think.
one quick thing? Because going off of that, you're so right. And I think one of the best things that I love about romance too is that the readers are some of the most accepting, incredible people in the entire world. And that it is a supportive community where you can like ask questions and you can get, you know, recommendations from people who will never judge you based on what you're trying to look for. And, you know, thanks to things like AO3 and Wattpad and fanfic, and, self-publishing ebooks and everything like that. It's just become this incredible world of information sharing. And yeah, the community itself is also just like some of the most incredible things. And they're the ones pushing for all of these new diverse voices to come through and actually be able to publish their things more traditionally.
Yeah, I wanted to jump off to the idea that there's this misconception that it's just easy to write a romance novel. I think that's like a mistake that I see a lot of new writers in the genre saying, like, even they might not love the genre and be like, well, I'm just going to do that because it's easy. Well, I actually think it's harder than a lot of other genres, again, because you don't have the same sort of plot to fall back on, right? If you're a mystery, you have a bunch of red herrings you can throw in, but within romance, you're really about two people and their relationships, and there's feelings, and you have to make that compelling and surprising, but also follow within the rules of the genre. And that's a tightrope walk, yeah, a tightrope to walk. I think that it requires a much more craft than people think. And I would say, more than any other genre, the book that will keep me up until like 2 a.m. when I'm like that, just one more chapter, is romance. And that is a definite skill as a writer, that to write a book that you can't put down. That's not an easy thing to do. And so I do think that romance writers are really underestimated within just their pure writing ability.
I agree, especially because romance, it ends the same every time. So you have to hook the reader, knowing that it's gonna end happy. It has to, it has to, it has to. And so you go into it knowing these people are gonna work it out, but you're still along for the journey. You still buy in, and you're still reading it at 5 o'clock in the morning because you can't put it down. There's just no other genre like that, really.
Yeah, actually, I love what you said, Taylor, and also you were hinting at it as well, like Jeannie, about the readers have so much power, and I think that's one of the ways we came to this panel is romance reader to writer. Is you had such an engaged like readership, and perhaps wanting to develop that for themselves, and maybe it's starting with the requests for, I want to see whether it's the monsters or the Amish, as Austen said, in a romance, or maybe trying a hand at it themselves. And kind of on that note, and again, you all were kind of touching on this earlier, but what roles do subgenres play in the world of romance, and how important is it to write within a second category in romance, such as science fiction or historical fiction? Is that something that's really important, specifically to have that other category besides romance?
Austen, did you want to jump in?
Well, I was thinking maybe Taylor should start because she's at the bookstore, but
Yeah.
I did
Yeah,
but
I would love to. I mean, I think just the natural progression of writing a romance, you kind of find a subgenre that it kind of will naturally fit into. And I think over time, people have developed really niche interests and niche ideas. And, like I said, it's become this diffused thing where, we have books in the store. Like there is one book that I recommend to everybody, and it's called I'm in Love with the Mothman. Um, and her name is Paige Lavoie. That's the author of it. And I think it's just remarkable that people have these interests to even begin with. And so when you go to start writing them and you're trying to find your voice and everything like that, you could have this story of two normal people. I mean, like literally, I was going to use the book Normal People by Sally Rooney as a good example of that, something that doesn't really have a subgenre. It's just this like normal story of these two people, and it's devastating and crushing and incredible. It's a great love story. But romance, you have this freedom, you have this ability to be able to create whatever world you want because there's no limitations, there's no rules, there's nothing that you have to abide by or do anything else. You have to have love as a central feature in the story, and it's got to end happy. Those are your only two requirements that you have to work with, which means that you have this blank slate that you can just go in and populate with everything that you've ever loved or everything that you've ever wished that you could read before. which is why I know, a lot of things with like a big trend that we see in the store right now is and I know I've already mentioned it, but like I will reiterate, the monster romances are having their era. It is their time. We have krakens and dragons and demons and succubi, Mothman. It like the amount of it is endless, and I think it's the most fun that you could have as a writer. And I think the writers, the people who are actually going in and making up these stories and this lore and all of this, they want to have fun. And so the natural progression of that is finding a subgenre that works. Of course, the historicals have always been a thing. We have all the historical subgenres here. Also with having queer romances as a subgenre of like the regular romance umbrella, it's become something that's been a lot more accepted and popularized. And I'm not just talking queer romances, I'm talking like especially sapphic romances and romances that feature trans and non-binary characters. Male loving male romance stories have been kind of accepted a lot in the last decade, but authors have had a hard time traditionally publishing stories that feature sapphic leads and or leads that are trans or non-binary. And just based on their like tenacious hard work and their like unapologetic writing of it and being like, no, actually you can publish this, it will sell, I promise. you We've created this, we're creating more and more subgenres that are so popular in the store that they have their own sections within the store.
Yeah, and I think what Taylor's saying, like, because love is such an all-encompassing category, right? Like, you do have all these subgenres, but I don't necessarily think it's like necessary. Like, you don't have to write a monster. Like, you should write whatever you want to write, and if that is a traditional boy meets girl, like, go for it, write it. Like, write whatever you want, whatever speaks to you. I do think you need to be very clear about what you have written, because readers are looking for specific subgenres or tropes. And so if you've written a book that has it doesn't go beyond a kiss, it's a low heat level, just make that clear. Like, the thing is, you just want readers to know what they're going to pick up. I think that's probably the most important thing.
I definitely agree. And I would really come at it from the perspective of craft, that subgenre tells you so much about what you as the writer need to put into the work. So, for example, fantasy might follow a different story structure than a contemporary romance. But those are just tools and avenues for the writer to sort of be guided through creating that project. And then on the opposite side, when it is done, to both Taylor's and Austen's points, marketing and knowing where in the market you fit. I've seen just so many projects that, were passed over by the traditional market, which is very understandable. It's really not anymore like a quality indicator. It's really a volume game. And traditional publishers are there to make a profit, as are indie authors or authors at other parts in the market, like small press, boutique publishers that are putting out really great work. Everyone wants to be profitable and make money doing this, but I think being clear about what you're writing so that you can find the right avenue to reach that reader and then keep them coming back to you, that's really the beauty of just identifying what you're writing, knowing what the expectations of the subgenre are, and then working within them. Like, for example, if you're going to write young adult fantasy, but you've really never gotten past that 50,000 word mark, you're probably going to feel, your work's going to feel like it falls way short when just, you throw the subgenre out there, young adult fantasy romance, and I'm thinking immediately 80,000 words minimum. There's a top end of how long it needs to be. There's just a lot of stuff that needs to go in there. And so both from, the pre-publication, the craft side, and then the post marketing, distribution, finding your way through that, consumer world, subgenres are really critical so that you're doing what you need to do, because we all want to, have our friends and family read our books, but ideally millions of other people that we don't know will also pick up our work and spend money on it.
Yeah, I love how you said that word craft and keep coming back to that, because that implies a level of just practice and also just knowledge around the whole industry. And so I especially for you, Jeannie, just to kick us off, what advice would you have for a first time romance writer and then publisher, specifically someone who's interested, if they have their first manuscript, and how does self-publishing differ from traditional publishing, just because you have a strong background in those two worlds. And then I know that the other two do as well. And how does that change how you would brand that book? And so again, touching in the marketing aspect of it, knowing that there's all these different categories that would go into how it's going to be later on.
Yeah, well, first of all, I appreciate it, and I'll try not to talk for the next 30 minutes about that question. The number one piece of advice I would give to anyone who wants to write their own romance is there's so many resources out there, YouTube videos, podcasts, classes, but the best teacher are the books that, are in the genre on the bookshelf where you want your book to be. So, I mean, literally, it's as easy as studying Amazon, studying barnesandnoble.com. You don't even have to leave your house, to find out what's selling, what authors are producing it. And really the difference between the top performing works on Amazon and the top performing works on like barnesandnoble.com, let's say, are potentially how they're being sold, because barnesandnoble.com is really not going to have the depth of self-published or indie boutique published work, whereas Amazon's get pretty much everything. Almost everybody who's publishing in some way, shape, or form has work on Amazon. So I would study the different parts of the market, know what's doing well. I mean, you might really laugh to think that, like, when I say the title, people do giggle, but like Morning Glory Milking Farm is like a completely endearing. Taylor's like, yeah, it's fantastic. Like, and until you read it, the title is so provocative and it's going to get a reaction out of people. You're probably, maybe you would see it in the top selling books on barnesandnoble.com. But if you're interested in writing monster erotica or monster romance, find out what's selling and read those books, more than what somebody like me, an instructor, an editor, a book coach, or anybody that you talk to in a critique group, they can tell you what they like, but knowing what's really being purchased and like consumed by the readers who are loving that work, the only way to do that is to know the best-selling books, popular books, well-reviewed books, and then study them. Like, don't just read them and be like, oh, that was good, I think I can do that. Look at page one. Think about the fact that a literary agent's only going to give you the first 3 to 5 pages. If they make it past your query letter to make a buying decision about your book, what in the first 3 to 5 pages of the book that you love happens? What's set up? What's put out on the page? If you do 50 pages of setup and backstory on each character, just knowing that like an agent's not going to read the first 50 pages. They want the first 3, the first 5. And that's about how much time you really have as well to hook a reader who just picks you up off KU and is flipping on their phone or on a Kindle device to read your self-published book. So if you think about just the numbers, like the average reader who's a very voracious reader might read 200 books in a year. How are you going to stand out? How are you going to compete? And the best way to learn and know that is read a lot and study what they do. Like, think about my mom with her like little yellow legal pad making notes and like mess up your house with books that you've loved, because those are really the best teachers. And I'm sorry, Brooks, I think I only answered like one tiny slim piece of your question. So if I missed anything, I'll come back after our other brilliant panelists
That
have a chance to talk.
You had very broad advice and very specific advice all wrapped in one response. So that was wonderful. But yes, we'll get to the next two.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Like, read as much as possible, study it. Like I said, I think, people do go in thinking that it's going to be easy. So and I think if you don't like romance, don't write a romance novel. Like, I think there are people who think that, oh, it's going to be a moneymaker, right? Like, so I'll just do this genre. It'd be so much easier. It is really not. I mean, I think all writing is hard. I think like writing a grocery list is hard. So like, if you're going to have to write like 300 pages, like it should be something you like. And to that point, I think you should write a book that you want to read. What's something out there that like you're wishing for, or maybe younger you wish they could have found. I think obviously there's a big focus right now on authenticity, and I think that's great. And I think it's a way that within a genre that does have a set rules, it does make books stand out when somebody really knows the world and the characters that they're writing. So think about like, what's a story that you can tell that nobody else can tell, or very few people could tell. And then read those books and study those books, because they're not just romance, for all genre, there are certain rules. And if you don't follow those rules, or knowingly break those rules for a very specific reason, your book isn't going to work. It's going to feel wrong, right? It's like if you use the wrong ingredient in a recipe, like it's just not going to taste like what people are expecting it to taste like. So I think, yeah, just study and think about who you are and what you want to read.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think that, if you find yourself that you read fantasies and then you go and you try to write a contemporary romance book with like two people who work at a bookstore, it's gonna feel really foreign and it's gonna read really foreign because um, the style of writing or reading in fantasy is not going to translate to like then if you're going to try to write in the style of fantasy, but it's a contemporary book. The problems and the traits of every character are just going to be really different. And I think when you're writing, one of the best things that I can recommend as both a reader and as like a bookseller, as someone who actually like takes these books and finds them for the people who want to read them and then give it to them. The number one most important thing, even above subgenre, is trope. Think about the tropes that you want to include, and then be really deliberate about them. One of the best things about romance books is that they're very formulaic. And of course, I say that, and they all have like these like variations all through it, but throughout much of it, Jeannie teaches it. It's like it is a craft. There is a science behind it, a formula, arithmetic, all of it. And so if you have these tropes that you lace well throughout your whole story and you lead with it, I mean, like we mentioned, a lot of times people only have like romance readers, they're voracious readers, they're quick readers, and they will not hesitate to DNF a book, to do not finish, to like just put down a book and never pick it up again. And so if you can come at them strong in the first, chapter, we talked about the first chapter of the Hunger Games, though it not being like a true romance, it being like technically perfect and it giving you every little piece of information that you need. Tropes are what your best friend, absolutely your best friend. Go heavy on them. People love them. You can't have too many. And then people are also really serious about them. Some people are like, I don't read friends to lovers. I only read enemies to lovers. Some people, they want a forced proximity trope, or they want a one bed trope, or plays on them. They like to see when you subvert their expectation and you give it to them, but not necessarily. For example, in Ali Hazelwood's The Love Hypothesis is one of my favorite examples. Um, the two main characters, Adam and Olive, go and stay in a hotel room and they have to share a room. And Olive, the whole time, she's like freaking out. She's like, oh my God, there's only going to be one bed. There's only going to be one bed. And then they get in there and it's two double beds. And she's like, oh, thank God. But then they hook up and they sleep in the same bed in the end. So it is a one bed trope, even though you had the two double beds to begin with. And it's just perfect. It's perfect. And so, I think those little like, that's like it's like adding like fresh herbs on top of like the food that you just made. It's like all the little things that just make it taste even better.
Oh, that's like a wonderful analogy. I know we have one more question and then we'll go to our Q&A. But this has been a wonderful discussion. Yeah. But I just want to know what trends are you seeing in the romance world, and just how has that changed over the last couple years? And do you have any predictions for the future? What do you see is coming, on the horizon?
Taylor, you should lead that off. I have opinions and thoughts, but you should definitely.
I actually that was what I took some notes beforehand, and that was like what my notes were about like the trends that I'm seeing in the store and then how they change. And obviously, I think that the real world very much like mirrors what's then going to happen in the romance world. Like I don't think that it's a coincidence that the success of 50 Shades of Grey coming after the recession in like 2008 to 2010, like that's not a coincidence, right? And like granted, like I was very young. I was like 13, 14 when that happened. But like I even remember being like, oh, like the allure of a billionaire romancing you and then giving you everything that you've ever wanted. That's no secret. The rise of vampires, and everything like that. What some of the things that we're seeing here in the store, a lot of contemporaries are book focused. So a lot of like book lovers, book readers, book store owners, a lot of things to do with books. I think people find that coziness. I also think coming out of the pandemic, we're seeing a lot of like really big new ideas. We're looking at a lot of dark romances, darker themes, things like there's the Never After series by Emily McIntyre. The first book is called Hooked, and it's a dark retelling of Captain Hook and Wendy, which is to say that the dark retellings are like one of our most popular genres that we're currently selling here in the store. A lot of, you know, dark Little Mermaids, or like dark Aladdin, like Jafar and Jasmine, things like that. People want to deal, I think, with these like larger, darker topics, and they feel safe doing it in a romance book because it's also written by people they trust. You know, it's not going to be you know, a great example is this terrible book. I don't recommend it. And I will go on the record to say I don't recommend it, called Diary of an Oxygen Thief. And it's by this anonymous male author. And the whole book is about like harming women. And obviously it's like a very damaging, terrible, horrible book that's like published by, you know, a big publisher. But when you turn that on its head and you have it written by people who care about their audience and care about the people who they're writing about, even though these people are fictionalized, you create this safe space where you can start to deal with darker topics. Mafia romances are really in right now. Perhaps that's because people watched The Sopranos during the pandemic. I watched The Sopranos during the pandemic, and I'm really into mafia romances right now, as well as like all of my friends. So like that's a really big thing. Um, Also, historicals in the same vein of the Bridgerton TV show is like one of the most fascinating things I've ever seen. Don't Popular culture has a great handle on all of it. And I will also say, whether it is in literature or in fashion or in architecture or in interior style, uh, trend is 50% nostalgia. And you know, people are, I think, really starting to get back into like that YA dystopian type of thing. Alex Astor's Lightlark, I think, is a great example of that. You know, we're reintroduced into this world of dystopia, a little a la Hunger Games type of thing. And her success is not to be, you know, dismissed, because I think people like what they know, and they like what they originally fell in love with. And so, you know, don't feel bad if you want to go write something and you're like, oh, it's like so tired and true and whatever. It's so 10 years ago. People are wearing low-rise jeans. It's back. You know, the mid-aughts is back. So go with what you love and what you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think Taylor, you definitely have like the bird's eye view for sure. I was reading some lists of like, you know, books we're excited are coming out. I personally noticed, similar to what you were saying about book lovers, a lot of screenwriters were featured. A lot of tech, a lot of taking place in like the tech world, Silicon Valley startups. But I think overall, and I think it's great, is just like there is, yeah, this like rise of own voices and authenticity, and telling stories about different cultures and races and sexuality and gender that maybe hadn't been as welcome before. And I think that's going to continue, as it should. And I think that that's really freeing and empowering to a lot of people, and it's great. And I think, yeah, that's mostly what I've been seeing. Also, the success of Bridgerton and the aftermath of that as well.
Yeah, people always ask me like, well, I really want to write a vampire romance, but isn't a market saturated? I can't, you know, sell vampires. You hear publishers and agents say things like, I don't want to see another one of these, or I've seen too much of this. And I just think the trend spot is really like to understand what's going on with our culture in the world. Like to Taylor's point, like people have been home for 3 years dealing with things. And so the rise of paranormal and fantasy romance, it's not the rise because it's always been on the rise. But if you look at even just Google trends and the things that are ranking really high on sales lists, it's those immersive, escapist, really massive stories that, whether it's a retelling or dystopian vampires, it's sort of giving us the things that we are very comfortable with, but allowing us to explore really massive things because we've just been home isolated and not able to do that in our own real lives. And I think the sort of bounce back too in the contemporary arena is, the rise of mafia. Bikers have always been around and have been very popular, but sort of the billionaire, I think, is a little bit falling out of favor only because of the distastefulness that's been attached to that label in the real world. So finding other ways to give us, ease, comfort, workplace, morally gray characters. I think that's how you see what the trends have been and what the subgenres have done and sort of predict what people are going to be interested in. But that's not to say like who could have seen, how exciting and massive monster romance and erotica was. I mean, Ruby Dixon's been doing it for years, but it's never had its moment like it's had right now. And so I think it's really important to be in touch with trends, but also I think Austen said this earlier, like write the story that you care about. If you think there's so much vampire romance out there, trust me, it doesn't matter. Like there are avid people who really can never get enough. So know what you know and be a smart student sort of the industry, but only to the extent that that helps you make good choices. For me, if I'm struggling, do I really want to write urban fiction, like contemporary world, but with vampires or magic or whatever? Or am I thinking more in the world of an epic fantasy where there's no technology and there's that more medieval vibe or historical vibe to it? That might be something that then I'm using to make a decision. Well, which direction do I want to go? Am I more comfortable here or here? Knowing that the market's doing both are really popular right now. And then long term, if I'm planning an author career or a series or a brand, using that information to help me make decisions so that I don't write one book and think, I hated that. I can't do it again. And now, you've got this like solo project that maybe you're working around. But again, you can bounce back in this industry from just about any, and I don't want to say mistake or misstep, because obviously there are things we don't want to do. But rebranding, reinventing yourself. There are authors out there who have 3 pen names. So they're writing all over the place, erotic here and low heat Amish romance over there. So finding what people are reading is really a lot about understanding what people are going through and finding a way to just like give them that joy and give them that escape in the way that you want it to for yourself, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to view trends, is looking at what's happening in the current world right now. I think that I hadn't never looked at it that way. I think that's really sound advice. I want to make sure we get to some of our participants' questions, or our attendees' questions. I think the best way to do that, because there are so many of you, I might not see a hand wave go up, but what you can do is just type out a question in the chat and I'll read it out, or you can use the the raise the hand function on Zoom, and I can call on you if you would prefer to elaborate and ask in person, and I'll try and scroll through and make sure I find everyone. But if I don't, just write something in the chat and I'll read it there. But first, the first question comes from Betsy, where she asks, where can I publish romance short stories? So any advice for her there?
Taylor, you probably have some thoughts about length. I just, from what I'm seeing with people I work with, is it can be a little bit difficult to publish short stories. If a book is too small, it's really tough to put into print and get distributed widely. So if you're thinking about anthologizing them, like a collection of short romances, or self-publishing, those are some options. There are some novels like imprints, for example, Harlequin, that really does have sort of a shorter word count appetite. So if you're thinking 40 to 50,000 words, that might be something that's really a full-length novel for some publishers. But I think maybe Taylor, you would have more, because I feel like a lot of my clients who do want to write short have plans to, maybe publish on apps or do something that's a little bit outside of what you might consider book publishing, because the length then is a little bit less critical. You can tell a full story, put it on one of the many apps that are publishing romance right now, and find readers for it. But am I missing any big parts of the market for short romance?
No, I honestly think that's a great idea. I also think there's room for, like you said, the apps I think are really a good idea. I unfortunately don't know of, I know that they exist. I do not know what they are. And I know specifically within those apps, a lot of the success that I've seen personally from short story authors has come in the form of audiobooks, technically. So people like to, sit down if they have 35 minutes and they're working or they're doing whatever, they like to listen to a novella or a shorter story that has romance in it. And I know for a fact there are apps that do it, where you can pay someone, like, people, and the I know the rates are like pretty competitive, so you're not going to be spending a lot of money to get someone to read your stuff. You could also read it yourself, or you can ask a friend or a family member and, like, pay them whatever way you guys agree on. So there's things like that. I would also not dismiss, the power of Kindle Unlimited. Um, Obviously being an indie bookstore manager, I'm definitely pro, like, physical books. We also have, like, Libro FM and, different ways that you can get books with, while supporting small businesses. But, there is a market in the Kindle Unlimited world, and, accessing free ebooks. People love to find ways to do that. AO3, Wattpad, all of these things, they started off being like fanfic type of things, but it's grown immensely, and you can just kind of log your story and use keywords and people will find it. Also, one of my favorite places on the whole internet is the romance subreddit on Reddit. People are always looking for good recs. People are always looking to read good things. Don't feel ashamed, throw in, if someone's like looking for a enemies to lovers with this, that, and whatever, and your book, your short story fits it, plug it, because people will read it. One of the booksellers downstairs, she read 550 books in the year of 2022. And if you had told me this 3 years ago, I'd be like, that's impossible. But now I know for sure it's possible. So, people will read it for sure. You just got to put yourself out there.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add to that, except that if there are short story authors that you really like, or short stories that you have read, looking to see how they published and what they did can give you a roadmap. Like, where if you're finding short stories a specific place, like, maybe you can figure out how to get to those places. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll just say another plug for the writers.com like Instagram account. We share a lot of literary journals and different publishing opportunities there. Same thing with our Facebook and our Facebook community group. So that's just another resource. It's not necessarily romance specific, but as Austen said, if you're reading a bunch of short stories that you like, you can find them there, and perhaps that's a good outlet for you. We have a lot of things coming in. So I'll just, not everyone needs to answer this, but I know, do you recommend using a pen name? I know we have some authors here. And I'll just also ask another question right here while I'm speaking, just pros and cons really quick as a request of self-publishing versus going for a traditional route.
I think pen name is an entirely personal decision of how closely you want what you're writing tied to your real life identity, and there can be a lot of different considerations of that, and that's just a decision you have to make for yourself. I don't think there's inherently an advantage to one or the other. So I think self-publishing versus traditionally, like, I think obviously the advantage of self-publishing is there's nobody who can tell you no. Like, you can just get your book up there. The disadvantage is that you have to do every single thing yourself. Like, you're going to set your price point, you're going to make your cover, you're going to hire your copy editor. Some people think that's awesome and it's really empowering, and they want to do all that. Other people are like, no, I'm a writer because I just like to live in my world and write my stories, and I don't want to think about the business side. So if you work with a publisher, they are going to have a copy editor in-house. They are going to have cover designers, and they are going to tell you what date your book is coming out and how much it's going to cost. Obviously, there are a lot of steps to get through that, and you are part of you're with a bunch of other books that the editor is working on, that the publisher is working on, and you're just going to have less control. If you really want to see your book in a bookstore, the traditional publishing is going to be an easier way to see that happen. So I think that those are the very quickly, very broad strokes, the differences between those two.
Yeah, wonderful.
One quick thing about the self-pub versus traditionally published too is that like if you're really a lot of times traditional publishing takes a long time, like really long time, like could take years to get your book traditionally published. And so, you know, if you're writing something that's super on trend right now and you're worried it's going to fall out in 2 years, you know, it might be in your best self-interest to go through and try to do all that work to get it self-pubbed. A lot of times too, it's a good way, like for example, Ali Hazelwood's Love Hypothesis was self-published, and then, you know, a lot of times we see things get picked up by traditional publishers. They wait 2 or 3 months and then they re-release it, and so it's almost like you've like gamed the system because you end up having something that's published much quicker than if you tried to go the traditional publishing route. But it has its cons as well, which Austen mentioned.
This next question pertains to the structure and formula of romance novels. Do those formulas change or evolve over time, or have they remained pretty consistent in the industry?
If nobody minds, I will jump on this because I feel like I've got like my mom in my ear right now. They definitely change. I think general storytelling structure, like we've got so much out there in the world that really distills craft down. What is the 3-act structure? What is the hero's journey? And there's so many wonderful avenues to really get into just general story structure. But that's where sort of really being a student of the subgenre and the market comes into play, because you know, stuff that my mom did in her books, even in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, 2006 and 8, we just don't see done anymore. We don't mix points of view within a love scene. We don't mix POVs in a chapter anymore. So if you're studying, or you only read books that came from a certain era, you might be missing out on what's happening in the market right now. And so to that extent, yes, definitely aspects of storytelling change, POVs, how many, what they say and what we do. Even structuring like where we start a book. It wouldn't have been uncommon in the 2000s to have lots and lots of setup before we actually see the love interests on the page. But now I think the trend is much more common to just get that meet cute, get the 2 love interests on the page as fast as you can. If that's page 1, if that's page 3, keeping in mind sort of with whatever your ultimate consumer is, whether it's an agent who might buy your book or a reader who's right there making a buying decision, the sooner you can give them what they're there for. That pace has, I think, changed quite a bit over sort of the generations of romance that's been published. But things like the 3-act structure, the hero's journey, you know, there's so many different ones, and I'll just not throw a bunch of names at the wall, but that is always, I think, brilliant and structural, and that we work with. But it's the nuances of how you actually execute on the page that definitely does change with time.
Yeah, and I will add just one quick thing on that too. I kind of mentioned this before, but I think subverting expectations is a lot of fun, and a fun trend that authors are really playing with, the idea of like giving you something, but in maybe like a kind of roundabout way, or like maybe even like throwing in like romance red herrings where, you know, you think a trope is gonna end up one way and it ends up going another. As well as the bridge, the blurring of the line between like erotica and romance has become a really big thing that romance writers have done. There was a clear differentiation between like romance books and erotica books. And now you're seeing a lot of like, you have the Tessa Baileys of the world who are giving you some of like the most lewd, filthy scenes. And it's just a normal contemporary romance book, and with like a cute little illustrated cover, and then you open it up and you're like, oh my God, this is crazy. Um, so, you know, that too, feeling free to like, you know, kind of push the boundaries.
Very good point. Um, one last question here, and this is just a very technical one. Just the average word count for a typical romance novel. Jeannie's smiling.
I'll just say you really do want to decide what that publishing sort of goal is before you decide on a word count. So for example, Harlequin's mass market paperbacks, they print what they want right on their website. So whether that's 55,000 to 65,000 words, maybe up to 75 if it's a romantic suspense. But I think the average romance reader sort of does expect a book that's around 70,000 words as a starting point. If you're writing and it's 125,000 word contemporary, you probably went overboard. But again, that's something you can quickly do the math on. Most scenes are about a minimum of 4 pages or 1,500 words. And if you just use that 250 words approximately per double spaced page and kind of do the math backwards from your favorite books, you'll get a good sense of like, okay, is this way too long for what I want to be writing? Is it way too short? And definitely, again, there's lots of room for variation and innovation, but you also don't want to be that one outlier that gives someone a chance to say like, oh my gosh, I edited a romance novel that turned out to be 522 printed pages and she self-published it. It just made a killing. Her readers loved it, but all along I was like biting my nails and sweating buckets. I'm like, it's too long, it's killing me. But there's always that room for, once you have your path, your readers, know what to expect and they'll come back for that. So hopefully that was not too rambly.
Yeah, and one more question I just wanted to make sure we got to is, at what point do you stop plotting / developing and start actually writing? When does that process come as a writer?
We probably all have our thoughts. I would say stop plotting as soon as you can. Just start with the words if you can, take a break. I mean, plotter versus pantser, there's no one right way to do it. So if you have an idea and something that you're engaged and excited about, you can get started and then hit, full pause when you get stuck, or if you're not sure you're working within the right structure. But Austen, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you if you were.
No, I was
about to
going to
throw
say a
that.
similar thing. That's like a really personal decision for every writer. And, me personally, like, I like to know where I'm ending, and I need like where I'm starting and where I'm ending, and like maybe like my midterm point reversal, like those main things. But if I overly like outline, then I just get bored while I'm writing. So you want to find that balance of kind of having a general sense of where, or at least I do, because some people like to have no idea where they're going and they just start writing. So I think you just have to experiment and play with it and see what works for you.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful advice. Well, to end the panel discussion, I just want to ask each of you two big questions. First, and most importantly, what are you reading, and what are your reading recommendations for all of us? And secondly, what are your socials? How can we find you? Anything to promote? What should we know? And again, I just have put everyone's links to a couple of our basic links in the chat. Once again, if people signed on partway through and didn't see them, so you can find a link to Jeannie's class with writers.com, a link to Austen's Naughty Books documentary, and of course to the Rip Bodice. But Jeannie, let's start with you. What are you reading? What do you recommend? And anything you'd like to promote?
Yes, I'm reading right now Carissa Broadbent's newest fantasy romance release. She is brilliant. I love her so much. And I'm gonna have to look down so I can tell you the title because I'm terrible at remembering titles. It's called The Serpent and the Wings of Night, and I am adoring it. It's vampires fantasy. It's awesome. And then you can find me. I have 2 Instagrams, a personal one, but I put book stuff out on there, and then at Romance Writing Academy is sort of my other. I'm everywhere: Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and usually if you just pop my name in, Jeanne DeVita, or Jeannie Book Jeannie with a G, like Genie in a bottle, you will find me. So
Wonderful. Austen?
I'm reading How to Fail at Flirting by Denise Williams. Actually came out a couple years ago. It just got buried on my Kindle, and I discovered that I hadn't read it, and I was super excited because I really like her. It's just contemporary romance. It's great. I oh yes, my the Instagram is Naughty Books Doc. It's you can watch it on Hulu. You can find out all the places you can watch it on there. I'll just drop that into the the chat. Yeah, thanks so much. This was so great.
Yeah. And Taylor.
So currently I am reading the beginning of a duology by Laura Sebastian. It's called Ash Princess. Highly recommend. A woman who realizes that she needs to save, that no one's going to come save her and that she needs to save herself. And she does so by seducing the prince with the intent to kill him, which is just delicious. For recommendations, I absolutely recommend Legendborn by Tracy Dion. It's going to be our fantasy romance book club book for March. I'm very excited for it and I highly recommend it. I love it dearly. And if you're looking for a good sapphic romance, I recommend Delilah Green Doesn't Care by Ashley Herring Blake. It's what was my favorite read of 2022. It's just amazing. And then I put both the Rip Bodice's Instagram, which is at the Rip Bodice, and then my personal one, which you can always come to me if you need recommendations for romance books. Again, I've gamified the whole thing. I will find you a book if you need it. Give me any requirement and I'll do it. My Instagram is probably ungodly, and I put that in the chat as well.
Oh, well, wonderful. That's a big help. And, just so everyone, if people aren't reading the chat, just so you know, we're getting compliments that, Jeannie's a wonderful instructor, and that Jill watched, Austen's documentary last year. So good. Love the Rip Bodice.
Did we lose her?
If you're not one of the who attend this panel, who, make sure you check it out. So again, thank you so much for everyone who came and attended this panel or who participated in it. And, we hope to see you again at other events in the future. Please, everyone, stay in touch.
Thank you.
So much,
Thank you.
Best.